right. Well, good to see everyone this morning. We'll be in Joshua chapter 3. Joshua chapter 3. I have a map on the screen just to show you what we're looking at as far as the land. And in chapter 3 of Joshua, as you can see, so here's an outline of the book of Joshua. So as you can see, chapters 3 and 4 will be crossing the Jordan. So that's what we'll be this morning and looking at the events crossing the Jordan. We've already been in Jericho. And so if you look at this map, the Israelites, Joshua, are on the east side here of the Jordan. So this is the Sea of Galilee, and it runs down, this is the Jordan, into the Dead Sea. And so Israel is currently on this east side of Jordan. And they're somewhere, I would imagine, in this region, and they're going to cross, and there's Jericho. As we read in chapter 2, Jericho's not far west from the Jordan, so that's where they are heading. But also remember, as we go back to Joshua chapter 1, and this will come into play later in the book when Israel, the 12 tribes, they receive their land allotment. The land's divided. And so if you remember in Joshua chapter 1, verse 12, and to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and half the tribe of Manasseh, Joshua spoke, saying, remember the word which Moses, the servant of the Lord, commanded you, saying, the Lord your God has given you rest and has given you this land. Your wives, your little ones, your livestock shall remain in this land which Moses gave you on this side of the Jordan. But you shall pass before your brethren armed, all your mighty men of valor, and help them. So, when it comes to the land division, you'll see that half of Manasseh and so there will be, and all their wives and their children and livestock will stay, but the men of valor who can help fight will cross the Jordan to this side, help conquer this side westward. And once everything is said and done and the land is conquered and the land has been distributed to the other tribes, then those men shall cross back over to the east side of the Jordan. So just put this in your mind. This is the land we're talking about, and the land division and the tribes, and that was in chapter 1, and there's Jericho. And so we're about to cross in chapter 3 the Jordan River. Now, just a few thoughts before we get into the text. I was thinking about it this week. I was reflecting on the words of Rahab as the two spies went into the land of Jericho, and Rahab to the spies. Rahab says, we've heard about all your dealings, about how you've defeated these kings and how you crossed the Red Sea. And I just reflected on that this week and thought it was so interesting because often, at least for me, when I study a book like Joshua, I'm so focused on the Israelites and what's happening with the Israelites, and I'm following where they're going and what they're doing. But it's interesting to think about Rahab and those in the city of Jericho and the Canaanites, for example, what they've heard. Rahab said, "We've heard. Rumors have spread about what you've done as the Jewish nation. We've heard about your dealings, and we've heard about how you've crossed the Red Sea." And so to think about what they thought when they heard these rumors, how news spread, and the miracles that God was doing through Moses and through Joshua, and the inhabitants of the land of Canaan heard. And I've often maybe been guilty of thinking that the inhabitants of the land of Canaan were just ignorant, and they were caught unaware. And the Israelites just came in and just conquered the land, and they didn't know what was going on. But now, from reading Rahab and Joshua chapter 2, I might have a different perspective. That the Canaanites, at least most of them, Rahab and Jericho, knew that they were coming. And I just often, or at least this week, was wondering, what did they think? And what else did they do in preparation for the Israelites coming, knowing that maybe they were the next city to be overtaken? Anyway, my point is, did a lot of reflecting and thinking on Joshua chapter 2 and Rahab, and how she at least had heard the stories, and the other Canaanites had heard what the Israelites had done, and put myself in maybe their shoes the best I could, thinking about how they knew the Israelites were coming. Joshua chapter 3, the spies have made their way back to Joshua, and they've reported to Joshua about Jericho, and so they're going to make preparation with all the people to cross over the Jordan. Now, something else that I would point out, and I don't know if there's anything to read into this, just want to point it out. There are several events that happened with Moses that are also now happening, or at least very similar, with Joshua. There's a lot of parallels. For example, Moses was the first to send out 12 spies into the land of Canaan. So Moses, when he was the leader of Israel, Moses sent spies out. Well, Joshua did the same. And so that causes me to wonder, is Joshua leading in a way that he also saw Moses lead? I think so. So Moses sent out spies. Joshua sends spies. When Moses was the leader of Israel and they were coming out of the land of Egypt, they crossed the Red Sea. And now we will see them crossing over the Jordan River. So there are a handful of similarities and parallels. What happened when Moses led Israel, and now Joshua, as Joshua leads Israel. So Joshua chapter 3, verse 1, "Then Joshua rose early in the morning, and they set out from Acacia Grove and came to the Jordan, he and all the children of Israel, and they lodged there before they crossed over." Now, if you read into verse 2, the very beginning, so it was after 3 days. Okay. So verse 1 tells us that Joshua and the Israelites, they came to the Jordan. Verse 2, they rested there, lodged there for 3 days. After 3 days, they will get up, make preparations to cross the Jordan. Notice a couple of things here. Israel is currently encamped. Now, my translation, I have the New King James. It says Acacia Grove. Does your translation say anything else? And I don't know how to say it, but some translations may say Sittim. Well, that's where they are. That's the same area. And I can't show you on this map. I'm not sure. Again, it's in this region where they would be to cross over to Jericho. However, the Israelites have been here before. In Numbers chapter 33, 49, it was at this place that the Israelites committed fornication with the women of Moab. In Numbers chapter 25. So let's turn to the book of Numbers briefly. First of all, Numbers 25. We cannot read the entire chapter. I'll read just enough so that we are familiar with maybe what's happening here. The Israelites are committing fornication with the women at Moab, and as a result, in this, they will be punished. 24,000 of their members, their men, will die as a result of it. And so, Numbers 25 and verse 1, now Israel remained in Acacia Grove. That's where they are before they crossed the Jordan. And the people began to commit harlotry with the women of Moab. They invited the people to sacrifice of their gods, and the people ate and bowed down to their gods. And so Israel is committing fornication here, sleeping with the women of Moab, but they're also beginning to eat and to worship their gods and committing idolatry. So Israel, verse 3, was joined to Baal of Peor, and the anger of the Lord was aroused against Israel. Then the Lord said to Moses, take all the leaders of the people and hang the offenders before the Lord out in the sun, that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, every one of you kill his men who were joined to Baal of Peor. So if we were to continue reading, that is what's taking place here. Verse 6, and indeed one of the children of Israel came and presented to his brethren a Midianite woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. All right, that's far enough. But that's where they are. They've been there before and committed adultery, fornication, and slept with the women of Moab, and they were punished for it. But also they worshipped the god Baal of Peor. So going back to Joshua chapter 3, a couple of other things that I would point out, at least just from an interesting and application standpoint. One of the many qualities that I see in Joshua as a leader, and we'll look at Joshua the whole time studying this book, and we'll point some things out about Joshua. But every single commentator that I read about this chapter, they all mentioned that Joshua woke up early. Verse 1, then Joshua rose early in the morning. And I do believe that shows his character, his leadership. In 2 weeks, I will speak at a men's retreat for the Woodstock congregation in North Atlanta, 2 weeks from yesterday. And the topic that I will be speaking on is be a Joshua. Be a Joshua. And it's the leadership qualities that we see in Joshua. So the idea, it's a men's retreat, and it's about leadership and being leaders. Leaders in the home, leaders in the nation, the country, the state, being leaders in the church. What makes a good leader? And we're looking specifically at Joshua. And one of my points is from Joshua chapter 1, how willing, first of all, Joshua was to be a leader. He was willing. God said, I need a leader. My servant Moses is dead. I need someone to lead. And Joshua did it. He made no excuses. He didn't beat around the bush. He stepped into the batter's box and he led Israel. So we see his willingness. But another point that I'm going to observe at this men's retreat is the fact that he woke up early. Now, you might be thinking, well, I'm not a morning person. Well, that's not the point. The point is that he was prepared. He did what needed to be done. Sometimes in order to prepare for something, you need to get up early. We might say in the church, well, I don't have time to study my Bible every day. I don't have time to pray. If you could see my schedule, I would say to you, then get up early. Get up before the day starts to read and study and spend time with God, or do it late at night. But we see this quality in other men of the Bible. We see this in Abraham. The Bible tells us in Genesis 19, Genesis 21, and Genesis 22 that Abraham woke up early. It says Jacob in Genesis 28 woke up early. Moses often woke up early. Exodus 8, Exodus 9, Exodus 24. David, one time, is recorded, woke up early. 1 Samuel 17. The women, whenever the Lord was crucified and his body was put in a tomb, Mark 16:2 says that early in the morning, the women were already on the way to the tomb. The apostles in Acts 5, verse 21, woke up early. But often it is said of Jesus in Mark 1:35 that early in the morning, a great while before the sun came up, he went out and departed into a solitary place. And also John 8 and verse 2. Jesus woke up early. And so we see throughout Scripture, Old Testament and New Testament, these great men and women of the Bible. And they woke up early to do what needed to be done. And so we see that here with Joshua. Let's go to verse 2. And it was after 3 days that the officers went through the camp. Let's continue, verse 3. And they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. And so they proceeded down to the Jordan. There they rested and lodged for 3 days. Again, we're talking about, I don't know exactly here, but I've heard it said that when Israel left Egypt, there were 2 million. So if you can picture, I don't know what has happened throughout the time that they've left Egypt, but I'm picturing a very large camp with a lot of people. And they go throughout the camps and they tell the people to make preparations. Now, this should have been an exciting time for Israel because they are about to cross over and they will start the process of conquering the land that God promised way back to Abraham. Get ready, prepare yourself. We are about to cross over this Jordan, and we're going to go to Jericho, and we're going to go all throughout the land, and we're going to conquer it, and you will inherit this land that you've anticipated for so many years. And so they gather the people, make preparations, and then in verse 3, they are instructed to watch for the covenant or the ark of the covenant that would be carried by priests, Levites that would be carrying it, and they were to watch for it. Again, verse 3, and they commanded the people, saying, when you see the ark of the covenant of your God, and the priests, the Levites, bearing it, then you shall set out from your place and go after it. And so they are to follow These priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, they are to follow and proceed after them through and over the Jordan, through the Jordan on dry ground. However, they cannot get too close. They are to remain a certain distance away. Verse 4, yet there shall be a space between you and it, about 2,000 cubits by measure. Do not come near it, that you may know the way by which you must go, for you have not passed this way before. And so watch for the Ark of the Covenant. These priests, Levites, will be carrying it. They are, the Levites inherited the priesthood. They will be carrying the Ark of the Covenant, but do not go close. Stay, 2,000 cubits? How long is, what's a cubit? We don't really know. I don't think. I think we have what we believe. What do we believe a cubit to be? When we study Noah building the ark and this cubit by this cubit, and we believe that a cubit is 18 inches, so a foot and a half, right? So, according to Bob Winton, who's a Church of Christ preacher, has a commentary on Joshua. Hey.
Prior to this time, for over 40 years, they have been led by a pillar of fire and by a cloud. Now they are going to be led by the Ark of the Covenant, showing God's power and God's faithfulness. And it's important, brother. It's also important to know that what you read in Numbers and all was the first generation. This generation, according to verse 4, chapter 3, says that you may know the way by which you must go, for ye have not passed this way heretofore. Mm-hmm. This generation hadn't been over in the land of Canaan.
Right.
So
right. Right.
Because if we want to know the way, we got to come hear God's word, and that's on the way. It's important. I hate to do this, but it's important. If you would turn to your Bible, turn to Exodus, the 9th chapter. I got about 4 or 5 little quick verses I'd like for you to read. And this is important because of them going into the land of Canaan. God is promised. But also, in talking, speaking of Pharaoh, he says in verse 16 of Exodus chapter 9, verse 16, Exodus 9. And then bury thee for this cause about raise thee up, for to show in thee my power, God's power, and that my name may be declared throughout AWS, all the earth. Now turn to Exodus 15. I'll try to go through these rather quick. Exodus 15, verse 14 and 15. The people shall hear, speaking of Rahab, let's go back to Rahab. And the people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestine. Then the dukes of Edom shall be amazed, the mighty men of Moab. Trembling shall take hold on them. All the inhabitants of Canaan shall remain. Now turn to Exodus 23. There's one verse here, 23, 27. Exodus 23, 27. And I will send my fear before the people and destroy all the people to whom I shall come, and I will make all thine enemies turn their backs unto thee. Now that's not a problem. Turn to Deuteronomy, the 2nd chapter. I'm trying to hurry. Don't want to take up David's time. Deuteronomy, the 2nd chapter. Deuteronomy 2:25. This day will I begin to put the dread of thee and the fear of thee upon the that are under the whole heaven, who shall hear the report of thee, and shall tremble and be in anguish because of thee. Now, one more. Deuteronomy 11:25. And I'll try to hush. Deuteronomy 11:25. These are all promises God made. There shall no man be able to stand before you, for the Lord your God shall lay the fear of you and the dread of you upon all the land, that ye shall tread upon, as he hath said unto you. That's the promises God made to the children of Israel through time, and we see that in Joshua 2, where Rahab says, we have heard. She had read what was the talk that was coming. The children of Israel, they saw the children, they knew they were coming. And she put away idolatry and believed in the true and living God. And that's important for us when we get to coming to chapter 3 now, as they prepare to go into the land of Canaan. And we need to keep this in mind, that God is not slack concerning his promises. And he has promised them multiple times he's going to give them the land, and how it will happen. Sorry.
Yeah, no, hey, don't apologize. I appreciate your comments and verse references. One thing that you'll find, and that I find in studying a book of history like Joshua, whether it be Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, when you follow the Israelites, there's so much references and connections that can be made, and sometimes we get lost in the details and forget some big things that have happened, and we forget Israel's history. You know, why were they in Egypt in the first place? Why did Moses have to go lead them out of Egypt? But I do appreciate you pointing out, verse 4 says that they had not been this way before. And so we mentioned Numbers 25, how they committed fornication with the women of Moab. That was a different generation of Israel, and they had died. The ones that had committed the sin there in Numbers 25 were put to death. But the rest, they wandered for 40 years, and so a lot had happened. And so this is a different Israel here, and they have not been there before, verse 4 says, for they have not passed this way before. And so they are to follow the ark. Now, something else that the ark represents, and why they cannot follow it too closely, is because it's the presence of God. It's the presence of God. And God is with them. And, it should help us to appreciate that we live under a different system, that we live under the New Testament. And God can be in our presence, and we can be in His presence through Jesus. But under the old law, the law of Moses, they had to jump through so many hoops and keep so many commandments and make so many sacrifices. And even through all of that, they still individually could not be in the presence of God. And only the priest could go into the Holy of Holies once a year on behalf of the people. I mean, it was so rigorous. It was so tedious and hard. And all of that just so that God could try to be in their presence. And it was a temporary system. But anyway, it should help us studying this appreciate that we live, and I believe that's what Romans 15:4 is alluding to, that all things that were written aforetime were written for our learning. And I believe a big learning aspect of that is learning to appreciate in the New Testament how difficult the old law was. All right, but the ark, the presence of God, they cannot get too close to it. Now, if we suppose that a cubit is 18 inches, 2,000 cubits would be around 3,000 feet, or 3/5 of a mile. So they certainly had to keep a distance, make sure they do not get too close. And they had to be mindful not to get too far away either, because they had to follow the ark. If they get too far, and they lose sight of the ark, so they couldn't get too far, and they couldn't get too close. And another note that's interesting is that this is the distance that was presumed by the Jews to be the maximum distance that one could travel on the Sabbath under the law of Moses, approximately 2,000 cubits. So they could not go too close. They were to follow at a distance. The ark will go into the Jordan first, and the text does not say it, and we'll get into verse 5 and continue reading. The text doesn't necessarily say it, but I imagine that in order to stay 2,000 cubits from the people, they would have gone upstream somewhat with the ark, or they would have had the people go further downstream, again, staying 2,000 cubits from the ark, because the ark is going to stay in the middle of the Jordan for a little bit of time while they cross over. So verse 5, let's get a little bit further before our time runs out. Verse 5, and Joshua said to the people, sanctify yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Now, we're not told what they had to do to sanctify themselves. However, there are other times where Israel was told to sanctify themselves. In Exodus 19, verse 10, they were to sanctify themselves by washing their clothes. Be clean, sanctify themselves. Prayer, another part might have been prayer to sanctify themselves. So sanctify themselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do wonders among you. Then Joshua, verse 6, spoke to the priests, saying, take up the ark of the covenant and cross over before the people. So they took up the ark of the covenant and went before the people. And the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will begin to exalt you. Now, verse 7 and 8, we have God encouraging Joshua. So I want you to just listen. I'm not going to spend a lot of time once we read it. Just notice God speaking to Joshua, the leader of Israel. Don't be afraid, he said in chapter 1, verse 9. Don't be afraid. Be strong. Be courageous. And so listen here, verse 7. And the Lord said to Joshua, this day I will exalt you in the sight of all Israel, that they may know that as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. You shall command the priests who bear the ark of the covenant, saying, when you have come to the edge of the water of the Jordan, you shall stand in the Jordan. So Joshua said to the children of Israel, come here and hear the words of the Lord your God. And Joshua said, by this you shall know that the living God is among you by the presence of the ark, and that he will without fail drive out from before you the Canaanites and the Hittites and the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites and the Amorites and the Jebusites. So these are all the land, the people that they're going to conquer. But notice, again, we can't point everything out as we go, but notice Joshua said that without fail and that he will without fail drive out from before you. And so, yes, they are conquering the land, and yes, they have to be strategic, and yes, they have to do the work, but God's doing it with and for them. God is, when they circled the walls of Jericho, who made the walls fall down? God. I've even heard, I believe, as we read Joshua, as we read about Jericho, the walls fell inward, which was unique. Because in that day, if you were to try to tear those walls down, you would have pulled them down outward. You would have pulled them down somehow. You would have somehow tied to the wall, anchored something to the wall, and you would have pulled it down. Or you would have tried to bust your way through. But the fact that the walls fell inward, well, that's an act of God. So, God will give them the land. He will drive out the Canaanites and the Hittites, the Hivites and the Perizzites and the Girgashites, the Amorites and the Jebusites. Verse 11, behold, the ark of the covenant of the Lord of the earth is crossing over before you into the Jordan. Now therefore, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man from every tribe. Now, we have a little insert here that Joshua was to select 12 men, one from each tribe. But we're not really told why until chapter 4. And as they are crossing, at some point, they were to take a stone. Each man, one man from each tribe, is to take a stone from the middle of the Jordan River. And when they get to the west side of the Jordan, they are going to make a pillar with those 12 stones. But here in verse 12, we just have, take for yourselves 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one man from every tribe. And it shall come to pass, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests. See, he's already switched. We have the 12 men, but then he says, as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests who bear the ark of the Lord of the Lord of all the earth, shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off. So if I understand this correctly, as soon as the feet of the priest carrying the ark, as soon as they touch the waters of the Jordan, the water's going to dry up. And it will stop flowing from upstream, and it will be wide enough and dry enough for at least a couple of million Israelites to cross over. Continue verse 13, the Lord of all the earth shall rest in the waters of the Jordan, that the waters of the Jordan shall be cut off, the waters that come down from upstream, and they shall stand as a heap. So it was when the people set out from their camp to cross over the Jordan with the priests bearing the ark of the covenant before the people. So you can see this. You can almost see this procession in your mind. You have the priests and the Levites with the ark, and Joshua with the camp of Israel, and they've sanctified themselves. They've prepared themselves. They're making their way to the water, verse 15. And as those who bore the ark came to the Jordan, and the feet of the priests who bore the ark dipped in the edge of the water, and then in parentheses, for the Jordan overflows all its banks during the whole time of harvest. So it had overflowed from the banks, and so that water had made its way onto the shore. And I believe I remember studying that in preaching school, just some of the, even still today, I think, seems vaguely familiar, how it would overflow and water oftentimes the crops, and they would use that Jordan overflowing. But anyway, so as soon as their feet had touched that water of the Jordan, verse 16, that the waters which came down from upstream stood still. Man, wouldn't you love to see that? I mean, I wrestle with how the children of Israel would see such great and marvelous works, and then before too long they become unfaithful. They see something like the crossing of the Jordan, or everything that he did in Egypt, the plagues, everything that he did, that God did, and Israel witnessed over and over. And I can't think of everything that happened, but to see it, and then at some other point down the road, they become unfaithful, and because of their unfaithfulness, they have to go back into captivity over and over and over. But anyway, my point is, can you just imagine watching the waters of the Jordan just stop? You have a hand?
When you consider the terrain up above, on the higher of Jordan there, the mountain, the snow is melting and it's flooded the river. And that's one thing that's happened here, why it's such an awesome thing. But also, go back to verse 13, and I think it's very important for us. And it shall come to pass as soon as the soles of the feet of the priests bear the ark of the Lord of the earth shall rest in the waters of Jordan. Lord, resting in the river, which is dry ground. That the waters of Jordan shall be cut off from the waters that come down from above, and they shall stand upon God in their presence. He's there, we'll say, holding back the water.
Oh yeah, for sure.
In the presence of God. And we don't think about the people. We think about the high priest that you mentioned a while ago was going into the holy place. But here it says God is resting in the river. And the people don't pass over in the presence of God. And we miss that a whole lot of times.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, great point. Hey, we got 1 minute left, so let's just finish the chapter. And Dell mentioned it really is as though God is holding the waters back. I believe it is referring to the waters when it says, verse 16, that upstream stood still, and upstream rose in a heap very far away. So it's as though something just stopped it, and the waters just rose in a heap. But let's finish. It mentions what happened downstream. Now, if you remember that map that was up there, south of the Jordan's running into the Dead Sea, and it mentions that here. Verse 17, then, 16, that the waters which came down from upstream stood still and rose in a heap very far away at Adam, the city that is beside Zaratan. So the waters that went down into the sea of the Arabah, the salt sea, which would be the Dead Sea, failed and were cut off. So the waters upstream just stopped and built up into a heap. The waters downstream, nothing's feeding it. It just dried up, failed. And the people crossed over opposite Jericho. Then the priest who bore the ark of the covenant of the Lord stood firm on dry ground in the midst of the Jordan. Notice how the Bible tells us it is dry ground. It's not muddy, wet, soggy, gross. It's dry. And all Israel crossed over on dry ground until all the people had crossed completely over the Jordan. Man. Gives you goosebumps, don't it? All right. Well, we're a minute past, and we got some stuff to do before worship. So I appreciate your attention. We'll pick up chapter 4 next Sunday.